Okay. Hi, everyone. We have changed platforms. We really do apologize for the bullying that took place, but that won't stop us from having our conversation. And so, Blandina, you are the one who was finishing up. Go for it. Finish your conversation. We will not be stopped.
Thank you. I'm still in shock.
Me too, that I can't rotate my screen.
Like trying to comprehend like what's happening, and by the time you realize you have like from is it 31 to 46 participants, and I'm like, that was fast. But anyway, so yeah, so I was saying how I mean I've been to communities where I've seen how there's gender biases happening. You know, some I've experienced directly, some I've seen happening to women, where you have young girls going through female genital mutilation, and because you're the outsider, you're not supposed to talk about it. So I think it's because of these things that I've been exposed to that I feel like more at home, and I feel like I can't keep quiet, I can't be silent anymore, because at that point it was like there's nothing I can do about it. There's no point of trying to address this. But you just get to a point where you realize that keeping quiet doesn't help. So keep talking until people notice that there is a problem and something needs to be done about it. So yeah, so I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be having these conversations, and nice to meet you all.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think we were reaching for a personal experience. I think, Blandina, you shared yours on how you had to facilitate this conversation and you had to sit down and touch the grass. Right now, even as we were trying to coordinate this conversation, you can see the cyberbullying and where we experienced images that are not worth being seen in this platform. And it's just to silence our voice. So for anyone who's been doubting whether this bullying we're talking about, whether this bias we're talking about exists, you had a first-hand experience just a few minutes ago, that, they feel by sending these sexual organs that somehow it will silence us, and we refuse. We refuse to be silenced, we will put up a fight. So I think going forward, I think Fina, you were to share your experience, and then Susan, like an example of where you feel the particular bias worked against you, and or how you were able to navigate it. Because the whole platform, I mean, the whole reason for this conversation is to inspire other people who might be meeting similar challenges on how to navigate them.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. So, as I was introducing myself, I alluded to how I find that as a woman, in religious spaces, as a woman, my voice is muted. Um, and where you are enabled to speak, there are restrictions as well in terms of the role you can play and what is expected of you, the gender roles that are still expected. And for me, I think that's the bias I face every day of my life, where you engage with a system that believes that you are subordinate, and therefore your role as a woman is to be subjugated, under the authority of a man. And to the point where, for a long time in my life, I pushed back on marriage. And the reason I pushed back on marriage was because I didn't see myself signing up voluntarily to go and be somebody's subordinate. So that's how in my personal life I've been fighting bias, because until the system is transformed and until we get to a point where we see men and women as the same, and men as women, both having the authority, because I speak the language that Christians would understand, both having the mandate to subdue the earth and not each other. I didn't see myself voluntarily walking into a system that's going to mute me and that's going to keep me in a box my whole life. So that's my personal story, Gina, and I'm still advocating strongly against subjugation of women in religious spaces.
Okay, we hear you, and I want to throw a question back at you. Is it more from how it's taught? Do you think that there is a way they are presenting this teaching in a different way than actually how it is written? Because I subscribe to the same faith, and I think for me, anytime you see before in the context of your union to your husband, now this is not something that applies in the workplace, but in that context, before the submission is called of the woman is called to be loved by the man like Christ loved the man and was able to lay his life for him. And I think that's very different from how it's taught in the religious spaces, where it's more from a cruel place, it's from a mean place. And I think there's what we can call toxic teaching on where these religious spaces, traditional spaces, and it's not just in Christianity, but in any religion, where you're finding they're using these teachings and twisting them to support
Yeah.
the toxicity and the cruelty. It's not from the basis of where, if we believe that the teaching is coming from a place of where God is love, that it's not coming from love. It's coming from someone is taking a particular verse or teaching and twisting it to meet their need of power and to subdue. I think there's room for that. Yeah, do you think there's room for that on your just by that? Do you think that's your honest
So
opinion,
let us maybe unpack a bit how patriarchy works, because
Okay.
for me and the mandate that we have as Soul City Institute is to thrive for a world where we dismantle patriarchy as a system. And so because within the system you have subsystems where your culture and your religion and other capitalism and other systems come in, you need to be clear what you are dismantling and why you want to dismantle it. So I believe that we were taught religion from a colonial, so we look at it from a colonial filter. Even the education that is done, it's done from a colonial filter. So we need to decolonize, firstly, that belief system, because you mentioned that you subscribe to it. And for
Right.
me earlier, I said Steve Biko was very big on saying that the greatest tool that the oppressor has is the mind of the oppressed. So we are taught, through the system, that as a woman, your position is beneath the man. And Gina, I don't want to make this a religious debate, but
Of
for
course,
me,
and
yeah, but
and
for
that's your
me, I
personal
believe
choice.
part of
Yes.
part of the biggest problems we face
Right.
today, it's that very notion, the
Right.
the belief system, that is transferred from each generation to the next,
Right.
is the same thing that now you would say you subscribe to that. But if we look at what it says in the scriptures, it talks about a man and a woman when they're getting married being one. How do you then separate when you are one? Where does the head come in and where does the other parts come in? Because if you are one, you are one. So if we
Right.
are one, when you are the head, I'm the head because we are one. But why do we then see that separation? Yet we are saying the two become one, right? And doesn't it say in the story that we are told of how creation came, that in the
Right.
beginning, both of them were created? Equally, he created both male, female, told them both to go and rule over other creations, over the earth, the
Right.
birds, not each other. So where does it come then where we now start saying, but the role of the man is this, the role of the woman is that? And for me, that's the fundamental issue we face in Africa, because of what we've held on to in terms of religion and culture, because they mirror each other. You understand?
Right.
And that's how we've created problems and why we are unable today to solve these problems, and women will remain oppressed for as long as that's the belief system that we carry.
Okay, Fina, I do respect your reasoning, and for the sake, because we do understand our participants come from different faiths, different backgrounds. And so this conversation needs a deeper analysis, because I think in the beginning when it says both were created, it's addressing the role of these people in your workplace. And even when it addresses the issue of submission, it's not from a place of power and diminishing the human rights of that person. That's a constitution of marriage that's happening only between two people. And that's, I think it's a personal choice, and it starts from a place of love. But that's a deeper and a wider conversation. And so it doesn't become a religious conversation that spills over and spills over. But we know the entirety of this book calls for respect. Even when you look at Jesus himself, he really did support women's rights, and he really advocated for these women over and over again. So I think the heart of this conversation is to remember that the rights of these women need to be respected. And I don't think in any way we're advocating for, or I am advocating for, the voice of a woman to be suppressed. And so we'll move to, so thank you for sharing that. And it's a truth that these teachings have been twisted back and forth to a place where the voice of a woman has been taken away. I have seen that. I have seen the toxicity of religion, and I've seen also the power of love. So it's, I think for me, any tool can be used to, even education, to suppress the power of women. Or the humanity of women. The next person we'll have was Sue. I want you to speak about maybe a personal experience you had in terms of challenging the biases in the tech space. And also, Fina, I want you to speak about the civic space. So I'll come back to you.
Great.
Sure. Okay. And then,
so, as I mentioned, I've been in this tech space for 10 plus years. I'll give a specific experience whereby one transitions from one particular role in contribution all the way to leadership. So what did that look like? I was transitioning from being an individual contributor to leadership. And I'm going to tackle an experience where second generation gender bias I experienced that. And this kind of biases that are hidden, they're subtle, the silent biases that persist where women have made career progress but still lack in the higher ranks. So it started by being the only one in the space, and already there were organizational policies in place. But one of the key things that was lacking was, hey, one, how does Sue, me, be able to thrive in this particular leadership level? Two, how am I positioned in a way whereby I am able to experience myself authentically and not hiding myself behind curtains or behind identified lingo within the corporate culture so that I can thrive? And three, how do I find a safe space for me to be able to share my perspective? So I'll tackle them in those three ways. So it happened that, yes, the role was open, yes, but you keep on hearing the conversations of, hey, there are not enough women in the space who have the same kind of level of quality or level of skill that we require. And this is what you hear from several human resources conversations of, oh, not enough women to fit that position. Why this is happening is mostly because the policy has been same all around. It has always been that male culture, always been that space whereby, you have to, the loudest who speaks is the one who's heard. And also it has been that space whereby, there are specific rules and that were placed so that if you're in that position, you thrive. I as being in the tech space and finding allies within the space helped me break that barrier, meaning that I had to set my position by authentically showing myself in a way that was different from what the organization saw. And this was, how do I advocate for people looking like me within that particular space? How do I go outside and tell my stories and share, hey, there is this particular often within the space of there are not enough women who look like me within the space, but this is what we are working towards. So it did not just start from, hey, just fighting without an objective, but I had to have an outcome. Like, what does it look like for Sue and other women who look like Sue to thrive in this space? Does it mean that we have to tackle how feedback is given? As women, we used to get this feedback. As Sue, I used to get this feedback of, hey, you're great at this, but if you do this more, it was more of backhanded. And so it was more of double-sided, like you're too aggressive, or you're too this. Like, it was always put in a connotation whereby if there was a male counterpart like me having the same thought process, there'll be more of, hey, he actually embraces risk. And so these are the things that I had to discuss with my allies and show them in paper that this is what is happening in this organization, and how do we fight this? And so, or how do we work toward making this place open for women like me? It was just a beginning of, having conversations with creating allies within the space, having conversations outside the department, and also being able to come up with initiatives within the organization on how to have more women voices to represent products that are being launched. So these are the conversations. This is how I was able to break the barrier within the space of tech. The other way of how I also broke this secondary generation gender bias was to also bring the voices of women in the product. Predominantly, the product I worked on were developer tools. And so who are the kind of people you see in the developer space? Mostly 80% men. And you will work with that 80% men to be able to determine how the product will look like. But that was different in terms of seeing how me as a product designer will bring in the voices of women in these projects. This meant by, if you're starting the research, what's the demographic of people you're going to reach to? What percentage are women? What are they saying about this particular tool? Are we actually able to address women's concern within this tool? And it went beyond to accessibility. So this is how I was able to bring in the women's voices in the products. And I'm always key into ensuring that the products that are being developed, if it is under me or if it is a toolkit that I can share and leave behind after a project I have done, is to bring in the issue of how many women voices did we hear in this research that we are addressing, and how are we taking these insights, not with our own biases, but also just being able to take their voices directly and plant them within the product. Because at some point, we also have to also start conversing around unconscious biases and conscious biases.
Right.
So these are the things that I always look at. And believe you me, as I start my project, one of the things that I always ask is, what's the representation of this particular gender group within the product that we are building? So that is how we are able to start breaking through the walls of products that are out there, and also of products that are that are being built in the current spaces. And you could see this in example, like, I don't know if some of you have subscribed on, hey, how does an example will be Twitter. Example, like, did we look into spaces of how women are able to talk about their ideas without being shut down? How are we creating those spaces for them within this?
Right.
Example will be Amazon. How are we going to thrive? How are we going to bring women in these voices whereby we can say that this is a woman-owned product, and not just have the blanket of saying this is a product made by people of color? So you have to go specifically into granularity to call out how women are going to use this product, how are they being represented, and also how are they going to showcase themselves in this space. So those are the tips or the tools that I have used in the past to help me move from who I was 10 years ago to now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. We can see it's really been a journey, and you're not here to solve all the biases in the tech space, but in your own small space, you have created a few solutions. And that's the thing about this whole conversation, is that we have a responsibility, each of us, to address our own biases and begin to create small solutions within our ecosystem to bring change in that space. And if every person did that, then that would contribute to an overall change in the ecosystem. You know, Jenna, I would like you to share, maybe in the psychology field, or you know, a particular bias you experienced, and that more comes on the educational sector, right? But yeah, you can share an example, a brief one, and then we can have a parting shot from everyone. I don't know, how much time do we have, Fina, before we end?
Gina, we
Fina,
can
are you
give
there?
ourselves 30 minutes. We can give ourselves
Okay,
30 minutes to
30
engage
minutes,
also
okay.
with the comments. So on your screen, you will see
Right.
that there are comments and questions being asked, and I think it will be important to engage with those.
Okay, sure. So, Fina, can I get you, so after Jenna shares, then we can begin addressing the questions. You can lead on that, right? Because you're good in that.
Okay, yeah. So, in terms of biases, so there's a few examples. Interestingly, we had that example of we were hacked earlier. So that is a similar thing I experienced on the messenger on my Facebook. Men sending me pictures of their private parts. It's almost like the stars were aligned, and that's exactly what happened when I came out as a trans woman. So that was, as I said earlier in the previous, before we got interrupted, the thought that came to mind was, if this is what I've experienced in a week, imagine what women have experienced in a lifetime. And so that's when I started to see the entitlement of it all. Like, my body is less than, or I am less than, or I am a mere side hustle, or just someone's fetish. In another example, I'll give you a couple of, now I'll give an example as a psychologist. The journey of gender-based violence and bias began in my university, when I was working at a university. And girls in my practice would say to me, they would say, the university are kicking me out because I'm failing all my subjects. But what they don't know is that the reason I'm failing is because I've been raped 3 times. So now I have to fight to keep the student in the varsity. More than likely, she's out the varsity because the university will say, we've got a huge waiting list, we can't keep her because it's now a money issue. If she then drops out, the unemployment rate goes up. Because of the psychological impact of the trauma, her desire to study again or get a job is inhibited. There's no legal representation for her to keep her in the university. When she reports to the police station, they treat us dismissively or send her away. So now that's a failure of democracy. And when she tells her friends what happened at the police station, they then don't trust the police. So now there's this widespread distrust of the justice system. So you see how one trauma has this domino effect. One person, and now there's an incident every 6 minutes. And so that's sad. When I saw that, not only did I see the oppression, but I then looked at how I hid my own trans journey, and I realized the psychological impact of me hiding and therefore fearing discrimination, what that was doing to me psychologically. So there was such a kind of interconnection between my journey and me as a psychologist. For instance, other girls would say to me in my practice, they would say, I walked into my lecture hall and there sat my rapist. So now this is now A, her fear that there's anxiety, and B, her right to education is denied. That's a basic human right. So they intermeshed again.
Right.
As a trans woman, I was given by a company an opportunity to do mental health training for a company, six workshops, which came to quite a lot of money, 20,000 Rand to be exact. And the day before they cancelled it, And they said, no, we're not canceling it, but we're canceling you. We're getting another presenter. And I said, how come? And they said, because the audience will be more focused on you than the presentation. In other words, I would freak them out. The mere sight of me would freak them out. So I basically lost out on 20,000 Rand, which is a lot of money. So I've seen, to sum it up for you, the thing that resonates is in how many ways one trauma or one incident can impact you psychologically, socially, physically, economically, socio-politically, etc. And that is what got me, because when I ended my internship, 85% of the clients who were victims of gender-based violence experienced gender-based violence. But what sat with me was that even though I may help someone individually, on a macro level, it's always going to be high. And that was like a dagger to the heart, Gina. When I realized this. So yeah, that's to answer your question, Gina. That's where I've seen biases, where I've seen the disregard for someone's self-worth and their livelihood and their prospects and what they want to become. And I've seen it in my clients, and I've seen it in myself. So yeah, I hope I've answered your question, but those are some examples from my career.
I think Gina said I should then take over. Thanks for sharing that, Gina.
Okay.
And I don't know if Blantina is still on the platform, but there's a comment. Okay, is Blantina still on?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here,
okay. Gina, are you also still here? Okay, so there's a comment that is coming through from Prince Soka, who's saying, and he's saying, coming from a male point of view, I propose that we engage on patriarchy and how to dismantle it, engaging its custodians. And I think he makes a very interesting point, because I said, as Soul City Institute, for us, having seen how patriarchy, has enabled the oppression of women and keeps women from accessing freedoms and from actually enjoying, their lives to the fullest. For us, the only way we can give women what is duly theirs is if we dismantle the system.
Yeah.
And it's as a system, there's an umbrella system called patriarchy, but within it, you have all these other subsystems: your religion, your culture, elitism, classism, colorism, gender bias, all these things that we are saying today, we want to remove the bias. All of these things, are rooted in this system. And we need to get to a point where we start engaging on how we dismantle it, because dismantle it we must. In the same way we saw it fitting to dismantle racial segregation globally. There's no person who stood by and said, we are fine with being racially segregated. All of us stood up and fought, because we understood what it meant to be treated the way we were being treated as Black people. We were denied, access to resources. We were denied good education. We were denied even the mere freedom of marrying someone that you want to marry, that you love, because if they are white and you are Black, you were committing a crime. So we fought that system, but we find it replicating itself now through gender or gender discrimination, and we are not fighting it with the same energy because others are benefiting. It's the same way as when we were fighting, there were some whites who were fighting the system with us, and there were some who were saying, this system is fine, this is how it has been designed. So if we are to really break the bias, we need to dismantle the system from its core, That way, we are then able to say, now that we are dismantling, disempowering this system and the beneficiaries of the system, how do we bring in everyone? How do we bring women on board? So I don't know, Blantina, how you feel about what soccer is asking us to say we need. Do you agree that we need to dismantle the system? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I feel like it's one of those systems that for the longest time has made. I mean, it's the biggest contributor to women's poverty, honestly. Like, because women can't access resources, women can't own resources, women can't control resources because everything has to be owned by the man. But one of the things that over the years, as we do programming around women's rights, one of the things that now we're starting to realize is that the aspect of male empowerment is very important, because we empower women on this other side, but these women are going back to the same men who probably we needed to give them permission to do things. So we thought it would be a good approach that as we are journeying with the women, we also have the men on board and explain why we are actually fighting for these rights, and also to remove away the notion that when we are empowering women, it's literally for the women to go and fight their men at home, or wanting to be equal to men. So they just need to understand that we just asking to get equal opportunities as the men, to have a fair share of what is out there, because we are also humans. We are not um, lesser human beings that men should be prioritized over women. And it's something that is going to take a long time, longer than I don't know. I was just today we were just having a talk in the morning, and one of the things that came to mind is that, like, the International Women's Day started being celebrated 111 years ago. Today is the 111th International Women's Day, but we are still advocating for the same thing. When is this going to end? But then you realize that right from birth, this is how we are socialized, especially as African women and African men. The celebration of a baby boy and the celebration of a baby girl when you give birth is completely different. You know, a woman would give birth to the second, the third, and the fourth born, and when she's having the fifth child, people will start asking like, "Oh, she didn't get a boy this time." And you have women like literally falling for that pressure, and they just keep giving birth because they want that baby boy, so that they're able to be accepted, or they're able to be respected. Because people think you give birth to girls, you're really not worth being in that society. You have children growing up, boys being told this is what you should do and this is what the community I come from, for instance, I mean, coastal towns. That is how we are socialized. You growing up, you're being told you need to learn how to cook, because if you don't get to learn that, you will not get someone to marry you. So we don't learn because it's a basic skill that we need to learn. We are learning it because that is how we get husbands. When we come of age. So
Right.
very skewed way of thinking. It's sad, but I think we need to start having those conversations. And it's good. Maybe this generation that has access to information, has access to technology, they're able to see how different communities are living. They're exposed to different cultures, and some of these harmful practices that we have been practicing for quite a long time. I think it's time we drop them. But we can't do this alone. We need men on board as allies.
I agree. Gina, I'm going to hand over to you to facilitate. You had asked me to speak about, what we do as civil society before we come to the other
Right.
comments I saw. And I wanted to speak about, the work that we do as Soul City Institute, because since 2016 as an institute, we rebranded ourselves a social justice institute, but we wear the label of an intersectional feminist organization, and we wear it with understanding, because we realize that the realities of young women and girls is shaped by patriarchy and what has been normalized through the system of patriarchy. And for us to be able to afford the young women and the girls the freedoms and their rights, we need to teach them to name the ways in which they are being oppressed by the system, but also not only naming, understanding how then they can deal with the oppression that they are faced. So we defend the full spectrum of human rights. for women and girls. And when we talk women and girls, we talk anyone and everyone who identifies as a woman, not the social assigned gender, where you are born with a penis, then we say you are a man, and when you are born with a vagina, we say you are a girl or a woman. So for us, we respect that people will tell us that I'm a girl, I'm a woman, and we will respect that as long as you identify yourself as that. We respect it. We believe that young women have a voice, and therefore they should be enabled. An environment should be created for them to speak for themselves. I think we should learn to stop speaking on behalf of young women, on behalf of the oppressed. They have a voice. We need to amplify that voice by creating spaces, by making sure that we resource platforms that they can then come and speak for themselves. And most importantly, by building feminist movements, where we stand in solidarity together, to fight this system that is oppressing us. And I agree with Blantina that we can't do it alone. We need allies. We need, everyone on board, because at the end of the day, when we dismantle patriarchy, it's not only women who benefit. Men are also oppressed by this patriarchal system, So for us, we want to get to a point where the personal is really political, and everyone walks the talk. We're not just saying fancy words, but we want people to really live out the values of feminism. And it's an everyday learning, because as you learn the way of becoming, you need to unlearn, and decolonize your learning, because we were, like we said earlier, these teachings were so entrenched, they became part of our DNA. So we need to start challenging that which we were taught, that which we identify with, that which became our nature, and really go back to Ubuntu, and where we really respect each other. We live alongside each other with respect and afford each other the dignity that all of us deserve. For me, that's what we need to thrive to get to. And it's not impossible, as much as it took many years, decades, to get to a point where now Blacks can start voting, where we are somehow enjoying some of the rights that we have. We are not fully enjoying all of them. We shouldn't give up. We should continuously challenge the system and make sure that every time it rears its ugly head, we stand in the gap and break the bias. That's what today is calling us to do. It takes all of us deciding individually that we are going to challenge and break the bias, and cumulatively then we can start seeing results. But if all of us are going to sit powerlessly and say, it's such a huge system, it's been there for many years, we don't know where to start, we will never win. We need to start somewhere.
Thank you, Fina. I agree with you. And I mean, part of the people listening to us, the idea of us having this conversation and coming from different backgrounds is because it doesn't mean 100%. What we agree in 100% is that your humanity must be respected, that no one should take away your life because of your gender, because of your background, because of you. Your humanity must be respected. And so when we have these conversations, and we might differ in a few things here and there. Our main goal is to create a safe space for conversations, but also the one thing that we all agree in is that your humanity, that you must be protected. So the idea that you're a woman or you're subscribed to something else, your life should not be endangered because of that. I don't think anyone has the right to take away your life. Or to deny you certain rights of living because of differences. I think in a civil society, we must understand that I respect you because you are me. And if you are subscribing to Ubuntu, is I am because you are. I understand that you are, whether you are myself, whether you are working in a lower job, whatever you are, whether you're of a different race, I must respect you just because you're a human being and award you that, whether you're male or female. Um, yeah. So I do appreciate our conversations, and the thing about this thing that we are having conversations about, it's not going to end with this International Women's Day thing. These are things that this work must continue behind the scenes. It continues in our dining room tables, in our locker rooms, as we drive to work, beginning to change the space. I think one of the ways of also breaking bias, I think, is mentorship. And I do want, if anyone has experienced that, how do you mentor other people in the space that you're in? Sue, you talked about that, being aware that you were in a tech space and it wasn't just about you. It was how do you encourage other people? I'm in the film industry. I mean, women directors, I don't know what percentage we are, if we are there, it's very little. And even how projects are awarded, this serious biasness. How do you address that? And I think mentorship is very, very key. That when you are in the workplace, that you are an ally to another woman, that you support her building herself in that space, and it's not the idea because the field you're in only has one woman, then you want to be the only woman in that space. You want to open it up for other women. I think one of the most transformational thinking I had was last year was, it's not just my dream, it's about building for the next generation. What things are you putting in place, Gina, so that even if I don't necessarily experience them, will my daughter have a safe space? And having this conversation puts us out there. We're not perfect in our articulation. We're not perfect in our arguments. As you can see, our Zoom was hacked. It puts you in a vulnerable space. Sometimes, one of our speakers has been stalked by these people. It puts you in a it frustrates us. It's not an easy thing, but it's something we're willing to do because we understand the sacrifice we're making makes it better for the next generation. And I want to encourage these conversations across Africa because the status of a woman has to change from a beast of burden, from being subordinate, from being second, to her totally experiencing her freedom and who she's supposed to be. So I'll give each person 1 minute to give their parting shots on what they think about this whole thing, about breaking the bias. And then we will close it. And yeah, we will let you know about the next Pan-African gender-based violence conversations. And it's not just about gender-based violence conversations, but it's just about supporting the entirety of this, the human rights of a woman. So yeah, we'll start with Jenna. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, and my answer alludes sort of to the question that came on breaking the bias and patriarchy. Is that from a young age, I think we do have to help boys mourn loss, help boys with childhood trauma. We have to teach non-violent, egalitarian, and healthier forms of masculinity, and debunk this code that boys must be emotionless and just sort of wear this tough mask all the time, because patriarchy endorses violence and it requires our silence to continue. You know what I mean? So we can't just have episodic reporting of gender-based violence. There needs to be sustained media campaigns. It needs to be persistent, because often a girl with a good self-esteem will be told she'll be put in her place, because that's your place, things like that. So that's where I would start it. I would obviously, as a psychologist, more psychologists in schools and counseling for teachers, and more child mental health services, teaching active citizenry in schools, teaching mental health in schools, teaching bullying in schools, because often gender-based violence begins with bullying from a young age. More anti-bullying policies and legislation and anti-bullying programs in schools, teaching about substance abuse, and because the amount of times I've had people say to me in my practice, my husband came home drunk and then this and this. So more substance abuse education and rehab facilities in poorer areas. Then obviously gun laws, gun law legislation, and address the easy access of guns. So we can't just address gender-based violence, but we have to address the precipitating factors that lead to it. Things like that. So, I could go on. I know you're short for time, but it has to be a holistic approach. We can't always have an adversarial mentality. We have to say, how can we work with boys through this, and also look at the precipitating factors that lead to this, and then the resulting consequences as well. Because unfortunately in South Africa, an incident will happen, then we'll talk about it for 2 weeks, and then the incident's over. And then we move on to the next thing. So a really holistic approach is how I'd go about this. But yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for contributing. And again, I think the whole point here is that everyone has a role to play. So it's not a Fina thing, it's not a Sue thing, it's not a Blandina thing. In your sphere of influence, as a psychologist, as a teacher, as a mother, what are you doing? Are you teaching? Are you training your boys as you raise them up to understand their emotions, to have a better way of venting out their pain? You as a mother, are you doing that? Everyone has a role to play in this. So it's not about us just coming and having these conversations and then you listen and you're like, oh, yeah. No, the responsibility of the safety of women is up to all women and all men. It's not left for the activists. It's everyone's responsibility. And you have a role. I want you to leave this place empowered to know there's something you can do to change the narrative. Thank you so much, Jenna, for saying that. We really appreciate that. Sue, up to you.
Yeah, mine will be focused on two groups. So the creatives and the hiring managers in tech. So for the creatives, as you're building or writing up your work to be presented to the mass, especially ads, or even to be specific ads, when you look at it, are you representing women in that ad? Because that's what everyone interfaces with on day-to-day basis. Right. So that is one thing I'd like to ask creatives out there. What is the woman voice in your work? What are you representing within your work or within the product you're launching? And then secondly, for human resource managers or people who are recruiting in tech, it will be that the time that you start thinking, where are those skilled women? We cannot find them, is to look from within and start looking at the women within your organization. What have you done to keep them there? Once you answer that question, then you will be able to not just think about bringing women within the organization, but also creating that space for them to thrive. So that will be the two parting shots I have for the creatives within the space and also the people who are hiring in tech.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you. I think the tech space is one of the spaces where we barely have women. So I think it takes a lot for you to stand in that space and even just advocate for techies and creatives. Right now, we're seeing a crossover between those two fields, I'm going to hand over to Blandina, and then Fina, you're going to close strong. Yeah. So, and really, we appreciate everyone. We can't answer all your comments, but remember, the power is in your hands. So, Blandina?
Yeah, I think for me, after just reflecting on this theme for this year on breaking the bias, the one thing that I came to realize that this is not a time for pointing fingers. When you think about it, when you look at yourself inwardly, I am actually, perpetuating some of these biases unconsciously. I don't know that I'm doing it because this is how I've been socialized to be. So it will be to ask everyone to be aware, of these biases that are harbored, deep inside of them. And when they're making decisions, just ask yourself, am I making this decision out of bias, or this is an objective, or it's informed by objectivity? Because every day, and someone put up a comment saying women sometimes put other women down. And we do it not because we want to, but that's how we've been socialized. As a woman, you're supposed to be like this, and you see a woman doing something contrary to that, and you feel the need to tell them this is not how you should be as a woman. So when we are aware of those biases, those thoughts, we are able to control our thought process and are able to, make decisions or, make comments out of objectivity and not the biases that we've been taught all our lives. I feel like it's the time we need to start unlearning. And this is for both men and women, not just men and not just women. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's just acknowledge the comments that we saw. We need, thank you for that comment. You are right in saying we need to celebrate each other as women. And we don't only do it on days like this, but it should be a norm. It should be something that we do every day, appreciating each other, building solidarity and a sisterhood, because that's the strength we have. We have that strength in how we stand together. When we have power for one another, and power with each other, we are then able to feed off each other's power in fighting the oppression that we face on a daily basis. And I saw also that there are comments being made by Matsubani. I think he's also speaking to how, the system has entrenched oppression of women. There's the example of lobola. That's a practice that I think we still need to engage in terms of why is it that is seen as purchasing a woman. How do we get to that point where we feel that women are being put on a market with a price tag, being bought, and therefore once they are married, they no longer have a voice, they no longer have rights because they are now somebody's property. And it's something that we practice in the families, and that is how then we perpetuate the continued oppression of women. But I also like what Shireen was saying, that research is showing us that the numbers are going down since 2009, and therefore that says the collective activism has worked, and that is why we should not stop, because you don't prevent once something has happened, you prevent something from happening, and us continuing to challenge the status quo, continuing to have this conversation, it's part of preventing. The conversation is ongoing because we want even those who have not heard before, who come after us, to realize that we need to collectively work together to make sure that we protect women. I don't like this notion of when men say our women, we need to protect our women. We don't need that protection. I think if we are just allowed to live our lives as women, we won't then need to have this our women ownership, because it still entrenches ownership. And for me, if you ask me, I see one last comment. The mindset, yes, you are right, non-Dumi, so that we can only disrupt practices in how we think. Like I said, with the quote that I like from Steve Biko that speaks about the mind of the oppressed, but I want to close by saying, last year when we were celebrating 16 days of activism, we were saying it's time we moved from awareness to accountability. And we must always hold ourselves accountable for our own biases. In what area are you biased? And how do you keep yourself in check so that you don't perpetuate bias? As an individual, before, as you said, Plantina, before you point fingers, as an individual, what are the biases? What area are you perpetuating bias in, and how do you deal with that? And for me, that would be things that we need to do as workshop kind of things in communities where we have this conversation. But I believe too much in disruption. So I also want to say the other way is to disrupt the system. COVID came and showed us how disruption is done. You don't give notice. You just go into the system and you crush it whichever way you can. And you lose some battles, you win some. So for me, all I want to say as we close is that in removing the bias, let us disrupt the system and the structures and the norms that sustain gender inequality. That's the only way we can get to an equitable society. And all these other things we can do after we've disrupted. So I'm going to leave it there, Gina.
Thank you, everyone. We do see your comment, Domiso, on the religious cultural point of view. That's a whole conversation, and maybe we'll look into that. But like we said, our views of all these panelists are not necessarily 100% the same. The reason we are here is because you respect humanity. We respect your humanity. And so I think we ask that you go out and love your neighbor, that you love your neighbor really, that when you hear screams coming from your neighbor's house, that you do look into that you don't say, that's my neighbor, and whatever happens there, that you do give an ear to your workmate who comes to the office with some bruises, and that you do take a deeper concern. I honestly think that, before someone is attacked, or before someone dies, or before someone commits suicide, this person walked through the hands of so many people who could have been who were able to intervene, but somehow we are caught up in the busyness of our lives and we go like, oh, it doesn't matter. I think it matters. You are your neighbor's keeper. So, your neighbor could be your friend, could be your auntie, your cousin, especially with everything going on with the pandemic, with the onset of the wars that we are hearing about. Be extra generous, be extra nice. People are going through a lot. That's what we have to say for now. We will let you know more about the next talks that we're going to have. I really do want to thank my panelists. It takes a lot to put yourself out here. I think, it's not easy, and especially for Fina and Blandina, who are on the forefront 24/7, advocating and fighting for change in the space. We completely applaud your work. And we celebrate you. You are the heroes who are doing something that helps our space, so we thank you for that. I think we have to end, unfortunately. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who migrated from the Twitter space to this. We will ensure the next talks we have, the platforms are more secure. We apologize for that interference. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.